Valentine's Day wasn't invented for romance. For most of its history, it had nothing to do with love letters, roses, or candlelit dinners. Instead, it was shaped by law, by ritual, by lottery, and sometimes by public fear. For centuries, Valentine's Day wasn't about choosing someone. It was about being chosen. Stay with me, because the real origins of Valentine's are quieter, stranger, and far more human than the holiday we recognize today. Picture a cold February morning. Long before greeting cards or chocolates, the ground is damp. Straw is scattered across a village square. You can smell smoke in the air, not from fireplaces, but from torches and ritual fires. Drums beat slowly, not for celebration, but for order. Names are drawn from a container. Pairs are formed. And once your name is pulled, your place is set, whether you like it or not. This wasn't romance. This was ritual. Long before Valentine's Day belonged to couples. It belonged to communities. In many ancient societies, survival depended on order, not personal desire. Who paired with whom wasn't always a private choice. It was often decided by tradition, timing, and ritual. Midwinter was especially important. February marked a dangerous transition. Food supplies were low, illness was common, and the future felt uncertain. Rituals during this time weren't meant to be romantic. They were meant to restore balance. In several early European traditions, pairing rituals occurred during late winter. Names were drawn by lot. Temporary partners were assigned. Sometimes, these pairings lasted a season, sometimes a year, sometimes longer. The purpose wasn't passion. It was fertility, stability, and social continuity. Love, as we understand it today, came later. Rome's February ritual, Lupercalia. Long before February was associated with romance, it belonged to something far older and far stranger. In ancient Rome, mid-February marked Lupercalia, a ritual not about love, but about purification, survival, and social balance. Rome believed winter left behind invisible residue, moral, physical, even spiritual. Lupercalia existed to cleanse it away. The ceremony took place near the Lupercal cave, believed to be the place where Romulus and Remus were raised by the She-Wolf. This origin story mattered. It tied the ritual directly to Rome's own birth, a reminder that order emerged from chaos. At the heart of Lupercalia were the Luperci, a group of young priest-runners chosen from elite families. They were not celebrants. They were participants in a duty older than the Republic itself. Animals were sacrificed, traditionally goats, sometimes a dog, symbols of fertility, protection, and boundary keeping. Their blood was briefly touched to the foreheads of the Luperci, then wiped away with wool dipped in milk. The act was deliberate. Blood marked disorder. Milk restored balance. Once purified, the Luperci ran through the city's ancient boundary lines, carrying strips of goatskin, called febua, from which we get the word February. As they ran, they lightly struck those they passed, particularly women. This was not punishment. It was believed to transfer fertility, health, and good fortune. Many women willingly stepped forward. Some even timed pregnancies around it. The ritual wasn't chaotic. It was expected, controlled, and socially understood. But perhaps the most misunderstood element came afterward. In some periods, names were drawn by lot, temporary pairings that lasted through the season. These weren't marriages. They were symbolic bonds, reflecting the Roman belief that chance played a role in harmony. To Roman eyes, this wasn't indecent. It was civic maintenance. Lupercalia reinforced hierarchy, renewal, and continuity. It reminded Rome that survival depended on cycles of cleansing, pairing, and release. By late antiquity, Christian leaders grew uncomfortable with the ritual. Not because it was violent, Rome accepted violence, but because it operated outside moral supervision. It trusted the season, it trusted the body, and it trusted chance. Lupercalia didn't disappear overnight. It lingered, diluted, debated until it was finally suppressed. But February never lost its meaning. The ritual was gone. The instinct remained, and long after Rome fell, people still felt that mid-February demanded something, a marking of time, connection, and renewal, even if they no longer remembered why. When Christianity stepped in by the 4th century, the old rituals hadn't disappeared, but the world around them was changing. Rome was no longer just pagan. Christianity was spreading, not by erasing traditions overnight, but by absorbing them. This was how the church often worked in its early centuries, rather than fight deeply rooted customs. It quietly repurposed them. February was a problem month for generations. People had gathered in mid-February for rituals tied to purification, pairing, and renewal. These weren't fringe practices. They were woven into the social calendar. The church understood that removing them entirely would leave a cultural vacuum, so instead, it rebranded the moment. The loud festivals faded, the drums stopped, the public rites were discouraged, and in their place, a saint quietly entered the calendar. Or rather Valentine's. There wasn't just one. Early church records mention multiple Christian martyrs named Valentine, executed during the later Roman Empire. One was said to have secretly married couples. Another was associated with acts of compassion toward prisoners. The details are inconsistent, fragmented, and in many cases written centuries after the fact. That uncertainty mattered less than timing. By assigning St. Valentine's feast day to mid-February, the church wasn't celebrating romance. It was redirecting attention. Where there had once been communal pairing rituals, there was now a moral figure. Where chance and fertility had ruled, obedience and sanctity took their place. Love, at this stage, was not the focus. Marriage in early Christian Europe was practical, contractual, and often arranged. Romantic love was considered unstable, even dangerous. What mattered was order, lineage, and social continuity. Valentine's Day became quieter. No public festivals, no lotteries, no physical rituals. Instead, it became symbolic, a date on the calendar marked by remembrance, not participation. For centuries, that's where it stayed. In monasteries and church records, February 14th passed without spectacle. It was noted, observed, and then moved past. Ordinary people might have recognized the date, but it carried no expectation of affection. That association would come much later. But something important happened during this transition. The church didn't destroy the idea of seasonal pairing. It suspended it. The instinct for connection, for choosing, for marking time with relationships didn't vanish. It simply went underground, waiting for a safer cultural moment to resurface. When medieval poets eventually reintroduced the idea of love in February, they weren't inventing something new. They were reviving something old, softened, moralized. Christianity didn't create Valentine's Day as we know it, but it preserved the date, and by doing so, it quietly carried an ancient ritual forward, stripped of drums and fire, but not of memory. By the time romance returned to February, the foundation had already been laid, not by lovers, but by the church's decision to let a tradition survive quietly, patiently, until the world was ready to reinterpret it. Class divide. Here's where Valentine's Day truly splits into two different histories. Among elites, poets, scholars, courtly circles, Valentines began to shift. By the late medieval period, aristocratic writers started associating mid-February with birds choosing mates. Poems were written. Symbolism softened. But for rural and working communities, Valentines remained practical. Pairings were public, ritualized, sometimes enforced by custom. In some regions, being chosen or not chosen carried social consequences. Valentine's wasn't a private moment between two people. It was a public signal: who belonged, who paired, who didn't. When love entered, didn't replace ritual overnight. It seeped in slowly. Poetry came first, then coded language, then small symbolic gifts. By the time written Valentines began circulating among elites, they weren't declarations of passion. They were controlled, measured, often anonymous. Love was becoming personal, but still cautious. still constrained. The idea that Valentine's was about expressing deep emotion to one chosen person would take centuries more. When we look back, it's tempting to imagine Valentine's Day as always romantic. But that erases something important. For most of history, Valentine's wasn't about individual happiness. It was about survival structure and shared belief. It wasn't soft, it wasn't sentimental, and it wasn't optional. The modern version, with choice, affection, and privacy, is not the original form. It's the end result. Understanding this changes how we see the holiday. If Valentine's feels pressured today, that pressure has roots. If it feels ritualistic, repetitive, or emotionally complicated, that's not new. What's new is the expectation that it must feel romantic. For centuries, Valentine's was simply something people did, not to feel love, but to belong. So if Valentine's has ever felt awkward, obligatory, or oddly heavy, you're experiencing a tradition that was never meant to be light. In the next video, we'll explore how Valentine's slowly became safer, quieter, and more personal, especially for women, and how those changes still shape the holiday today. If this history surprised you, save this video and tell me in the comments, how did Valentine's feel in your family growing up?